Hey, it's Ricky and with RocketCon, and I'm here with somebody I don't even know how long I've known you. Easily over a decade.
Yeah, probably
Right?
about 12 years, something like
Yeah. This is my good friend. Well, I call him Kev Cran. Introduce yourself.
that. Kevin McElvaney,
Uh, yeah.
president accounted for.
Um, Kev, do you remember where we first met?
Yeah, it would have had to have been like in person. It would have had to have been in your house, but we met on the Org Summit message board
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, that's let me see if I wrote this backwards, so see if it shows up for you. I wrote the internet. Because I guess that's where we met. In person, yeah, I guess it was at my house. I don't the first time I remember us together was Death of False Hope Fest. But you
Yes.
played, and I was like, I had to have known you, met you in person, but maybe not. Maybe I was just like my internet friend play guitar with us.
Well, that was pretty much it. But like, what you did was say, we had to practice because I
Mm-hmm.
learned the songs, and then I came down to play that set. Well, I was going to go to the festival anyway, and then you
Yeah.
invited me to play with you guys, and I ended up. Yeah, I said, well, obviously I want to practice with you first because it's one thing to know
Yeah.
how to play the songs and another to be able to play them with the band. And went over to your place, and I don't think we practiced at your house, but like I
No.
drove to your place, and then you took me to whoever was drumming at the
I think
time's house.
Daniel was drumming back then. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. So we went to Daniel's house and practiced.
Yep. Yeah.
Wild. That's wild. That was
Yeah.
a leap of faith on your part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I met you there, but like a lot of other people from that message board I met for the first time, like in the pit, so to speak. Like I ran into them at whatever show we were both attending.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's funny. I can recall not all, but like a lot of people, like our mutual friend Justin. I remember meeting him. Oh, and Scott from Ontario. I met the
Oh
two of them
yeah.
like in the. Oh, actually, Scott from Ontario was a different time. But I remember meeting Justin like in the street, like on the Ben Franklin Parkway. Like that's the first place I ran into him.
I think Mark came down that one.
For
Mark,
Death of False Hope. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
people came. It was
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's where I met Ryan and Jordan
yeah.
for the first time. I think Flynn was there too, right?
Yeah, Flynn was there.
Yeah.
Mark,
Was Bottle there?
Bottle was there. Mike B,
Yeah.
Josh, Vegan Boy Josh. I'm trying not to put
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
real names out
Rob.
there that I
Wow.
can help.
Yeah. We met. It's where we all really met in person for the first time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It was really a lot of people.
Yeah.
Sloan, I maybe met Sloan before that though. Sarah, a whole bunch of other people came down for it. It was really cool. Like people were
Yeah.
traveling from Ian.
Yeah.
Yeah, all over the country,
So
and some from Canada.
So, world, that's how Kev and I became in-person friends and as you met, heard a lot of other people, a lot of mutual friends. So, yeah, that's wild that the internet brought us together, and now we're talking to each other through the internet once again. So I'm gonna jump in. We're gonna do 10 good minutes. So it's a 10 minutes of questions I had prepared ahead of time. And then we'll just kind of have a conversation, and then we're gonna do our top 10 Bret Hart rivalries, and that will make more sense when Kevin starts talking about himself. So, Kevin, describe yourself in 10 words or less. What's your tagline?
How many words was that laugh? Um, editor-in-chief of Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine. That's my LinkedIn tagline. So
there you go. There you go. That's a definitely a professional tagline, but not a personal one. There's a lot more to you than that. Kevin, this is a primarily board gaming channel. Do you like board games?
Yeah, love it.
All right. What's your favorite board game?
Gosh, that's a tough one. I think my go-to is Dixit. Like that's really like just to break that out. Like it's pretty easy to learn. It's more fun when everybody knows each other. You can make a lot of abstract jokes with it. It's
just
really a good part.
Art's really gorgeous in that game too.
Beautiful, so good. And then you have the different expansion packs for it. Are also really nice.
Have you ever played Mysterium?
Gosh, I know I did at one point, but I'm not remembering it very well.
Because it's got those kind of like, it's one person was murdered and everybody's trying to figure it out Clue style, like who the murderer was, but you use Dixit cards too, like the similar style of cards. You might like that. It's no,
that's not the haunted house one, is it?
No, that's Betrayal at the House on the Hill is what it is.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay. We're burning through classics here. If you ever manage to make it back down to Virginia, we'll play some board games. So.
I will one day, and I know I've had myriad excuses for not doing it. I think maybe the pandemic has been the best one. But.
Yeah, no, you never. It's never an excuse. Real life is a reason. But and you have a lot of real life hit you sometimes. So, so what is your day job? Because I find your day job amazing.
Yeah. So Pro Wrestling Illustrated is the we say the number one wrestling magazine in the world since 1979. It is that old. It predates me on this earth. I read growing up as a kid. There were some other affiliate magazines that I read as well. And my first freelance writing gig out of college was for one of those other magazines, the Wrestler Inside Wrestling combo magazine, which is not published anymore, but PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, very much is. If anyone watching this follows wrestling at all and has heard of the magazine, it is probably for the PWI 500 list, which is an annual ranking of the top 500 wrestlers in the world. That's the top seller. But yeah, this is a magazine I grew up reading as a kid. It was a little bit different back then. It was very much immersed in the fiction of wrestling, or kayfabe as it's called back then. And it still holds on to elements of that, and that like we'll refer to people as athletes and we'll say competed instead of performed against more often than not.
I will say they are athletes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think, I mean, even WWE, who like really tries to distance itself from the term wrestling and uses sports entertainment and all these other words, will still say athletes because they're athletes. And, some more than others, some are, if you're there, there's this saying that like, if you're big enough, you really don't have to be, you do have to be an athlete because you still have to have stamina to do like throw people around and things like that.
Sure.
Like, it's
well, I mean, and look at like Big Show, right? That dude was walking the top rope. That's not an easy thing to do. So.
No, it's not. He was pretty remarkable. Yeah. Huge, over 7 feet tall and 400 pounds. Over 700 pounds would be even more amazing to walk.
Those rings I don't think would be able to hold up. It's a lot. They hold up to a lot. But
maybe not that though.
Yeah. So, since you've been doing this job, what has it changed your perception of the industry at all? Because I know you've been a lifelong wrestling fan, right? That's something we bonded over. Like what is your change in the industry been, or has there been since you started?
My perception of it, you mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a little bit different looking at things on the inside. I will interact with people on a daily and weekly basis, not necessarily in person. That's even without the pandemic, that would be more rare these days, just because you don't have to do it that way anymore.
Yeah.
But over the phone and through Zoom and email and texts and DMs, just interacting with these people who, 5-10 years ago, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking to this person.
Yeah.
There's still little flashes of that depending on who it is, especially if it's someone I grew up watching. Like I had a call with Jacques Rougeau a few weeks ago, who played the Mountie.
Yeah.
Like that was like a moment.
Yeah.
And my wife, Megan, does not, I mean, she'll watch wrestling with me now, but was never a wrestling fan before we met, but she knew who the Mountie was because of wrestling, kind of back then.
Pervasive. It was pervasive.
Yes. And boys of a certain age watched it. And I think it was on because her brother was watching it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that. But I think the other part is I've kind of found, and I know you found this to different degrees with the gaming community too, but like the way that we bonded through music and,
Yeah.
you know, met online first, but then met in person and then developed a real friendship, and same with some other folks that we both know. It's happening with Twitter and some other, primarily
That's
Twitter
awesome.
and wrestling. Yeah, it's cool. And it's funny because a lot of those same people are, I don't know, I'm slightly on the older side. Like I'm like the older statesman of that at this point. A lot of people are in their like 20s, early 30s. Whereas I wasn't one of the youngest on our message boards, but I was kind of in the middle. You too, you know, and here, these are people I probably would have not run into. But it's funny because in a lot of other cases, they came from some of those same backgrounds. Like they were going to see the same punk bands that we saw, or they were interested in the same kind of art and movies and music. You know, so there's something about the contemporary, especially on the independent level, wrestling landscape that like draws in people like that. And I think probably part of that is the whole fest wrestling thing where they had promotions sprung up around that, or even this like the Lehigh Valley thing here now. You may have heard of them just because a lot of bands use this Lehigh Valley apparel creations to print merch. Iron Sheik uses them, a whole bunch of Piss Jeans, maybe a whole bunch of other bands. And then they created the Lehigh Valley Athletic Commission, something like that. But like it's basically a wrestling promotion, indie wrestling promotion. And they like the band, oh God, what? It's terrible. I'm forgetting which band. Was it
World
Snowing
Series?
Maybe? So, but one of those like third or fourth wave emo bands got back together for a show at one of these. There's a lot of overlap, and it's kind of cool.
That is cool. Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I'll tell you, Adrian never understood wrestling, never understood why I liked wrestling, and then we went to Dragon Con. The second time we went, and they had Dragon Con wrestling, and she got to see it in person. And all of a sudden, it all clicked for her. You know, I think there's a spectacle to it that I don't think people appreciate because they'll never take the time to go and see it live. They just watch it on TV or see the ridiculousness of it. And, you know, so it definitely converted her. Dragging, that was, you know, very much indie level wrestling. Not, I mean, they do get pro wrestlers in there to do, you know, a couple of moments, but it's very indie level, and I was just like, could you imagine seeing, you know, like a Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart in person? Like how much better it would be.
It's huge. But like the other thing is that with some of these indies, and not everybody, some people will stay like on the indies forever, and some it's more by choice than others, but other times you have like someone like a Bryan Danielson, who's very much a classic Bret Hart vein, who's now on AEW, and he was an eventer in WWE Championship. He started on an independent level. That was the first time I ever saw him work a match, you know, and then eventually he ended up at the top WWE. You can see this evolution of people, and it's not necessarily that he developed certain parts of his game that WWE a lot of emphasis on, like the talking and selling people on your matches. But the truth is he was largely the same as he'd always been. He just got to do it on this different stage. So it's not just because it's on the independent level doesn't mean it's not good.
No. Oh, that's fair. That's fair. I meant more just you know, I didn't mean they were very fun to watch, very talented, but you know, when you get
you're right,
that top level like choreographing.
Some of it is people are in the ropes, so to speak. But then in other cases, it's more of a stylistic choice that they're there, or maybe somebody's unconventional, like who was in Canada for a long, did very well in his father's wrestling company. You know, took a little while for WWE to one, sign him, and then two, really see the value in him as a top guy, because he was like a mid-level performer for always had that talent. It was just like they had to give him a shot because he was a little smaller, and Bryan Danielson's an example of that. And I completely understand what you're saying. There are levels to it, and even within the indies, there's some that have higher production values than others, some that have workers they're called than others. So it's really interesting to get in and see that whole thing and the range of it. It's just like anything else. It's like movies, board games, books, whatever else you can think of. There are degrees to which it's done. It can be as rough or as polished as you like.
It's when you're talking about it, it's funny. It really reminds me of like when you said there's the crossover with, DIY music.
Yep.
Well, it sounds like wrestling's got a lot of the same, tent poles as the music industry in this, the local act, and then the regional act, and then the, nationwide touring acts, the major indies. Like the way you're talking about Danielson coming up really reminded me of a band. That's kind of wild. I never thought of wrestling that way. I always thought about, it was who you knew, right? That's how it started a long time ago. Like you knew somebody, you got in there, and then like you look at, Stampede out of, Canada, or that's where all those guys came out of, right? They were all knew somebody. But now you got the chance to break in. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Certainly a level of politics to it. And I mean, it's the same thing with music or anything else. If you have these connections, it's a little easier to do well. And there's also a certain amount of, hey, for me now I can do it, and I'm dancing before somebody else. Like we've definitely seen that. I probably shouldn't name names, but I mean, even within WWE, there are multiple like next generation wrestlers who maybe took a little longer to get like long to it, but then they became among the best. And you know what? I'll say a name. I mean, like a Randy Orton, someone like that. I really do think, though he always showed a lot. And he's a third generation wrestler. His dad did it. His grandpa did it before him. Cowboy Bob Orton before him, and then Bob Orton Sr. wrestled back in the 50s, 60s. And Randy Orton, definitely, he's considered a top level guy now. Everybody, like industry wide, like regardless of taste, would be like, oh, that guy knows what he's doing. But he didn't come out of the box that way. He was on WWE TV even after having been trained and everything, learning the ropes for a while. And I mean, I don't think anybody could objectively look at his old stuff and say he was at the level that he was presented at all the time. But today it's like, there's no question. He's like, he's gotten to where he needs to be. So there's still nepotism, especially on those high levels, but there is a chance to get out there and do something different and really make something of yourself. And I think that's awesome.
I think that's really cool. And I think one of the things that's been really fun for me is the more you've done this job, the thing I've seen is your not just your exposure to, but your knowledge of, New Japan and just all the other international things that I didn't have access to. And I could have, right? I chose not to, but I got to kind of experience it through you. And that's really cool for me. Like, that's the thing I've seen is your just intimate knowledge of other things, wrestling related, I think is really cool. So
thank you.
What's your favorite non-US organization? Like what do you think is the best non-US?
My favorite thing to watch right now, and has been for a good year or so, is a promotion called World Wonder Ring Stardom. It's based in Japan. It's what's called a Joshi promotion. So over in Japan, not at every level, not across the board, certainly not always on the independent level, but the big promotions in Japan have always kind of, how there's men and women's divisions in the US. Rather than doing that, they've traditionally operated as separate promotions. But the women's wrestling in Japan has been, in Japan, wrestling has been on another level for a very long time. But the women's wrestling scene developed out of a mix of like the Japanese wrestling that was already happening, and then someone by the name of Mildred Burke, who came in decades and decades ago, one of the most the highest drawing wrestling acts, regardless of gender, of all time, went over in Japan, trained with a lot of these women, and then also simultaneously you had luchadoras from Mexico coming in, or maybe even it was male luchadors in some case, and all these influences blended together. Stardom is kind of like the ideal presentation in my mind of that in the modern day, where it's really at this high level. These are hard hitting matches. They're still choreographed, but they look very real. And in some cases they're kind of laying into each other a little bit. The same as how in like an action scene in a movie, they're not trying to injure each other, but occasionally they connect with that forearm or punch a little more just because it looks a little better. And there's maybe an agreement with some of these stunt people, like, okay, lay in a little bit, I can take it. You know? So there's that in real wrestling, in professional wrestling too, I should say, that level of authenticity that's people maybe don't even know about. But there's also these acrobatic things. There's characters and costumes and different units that feud with one another, these stables. And then there are people that defect from them. There's just a ton of drama built in that way. And even on shows where there's no kind of subtitling present, you can get a feel for what's going on. Once you have the basic, okay, this is so-and-so and she's with this group.
Yeah.
And this is so-and-so and she's with this group. It's just so well done. The matches are so great. I think you would really like watching them on a technical level. That's been my favorite to watch for quite a bit now. I really enjoy a lot of independent stuff in the US, but to your point with I'm glad you noticed that and appreciate that. But honestly, even over the past couple of years, I've forced myself to step up my game in that.
Yeah.
I'd certainly seen Stardom before, but I've really dove into it in the past couple of years because okay, we've not been sufficiently covering this important promotion that a lot of people are talking about. Let me see what the deal is. And, ditto with some other Japanese promotions, some European promotions, Mexican promotions that have been around for a long time, but we've maybe been overlooking them because we didn't have access. And in some cases it was just as simple as, let me send a DM to this person, and Google has I know a certain amount of Spanish and Google will fill in the rest. And I can tell if it's at least not total gibberish. And then on the Japanese side, sometimes there are people who already speak English. So let me start with them and see who they can put me in touch with.
Yeah.
And trying to make those, connections so we can have it in the magazine. Cause I don't know if you read PWI or anything at all when you were a kid, but if you did.
I did.
Oh, awesome.
Absolutely.
So one thing that was cool about it is that, we could watch when we were kids, WWF and WCW, and then at a certain point, ECW.
Yeah.
But on TV, it was a lot harder to see stuff.
Yeah.
If you didn't know about the whole tape trading side of things, which as a kid, I certainly didn't.
Of course.
You basically relied on whatever kind of semi-official compilations you could find in a store somewhere.
Yep.
And PWI, which would tell you about the wrestling that was going on everywhere else. So that's been my mission. And in a way, it totally flows from that same vein of, ooh, I like this band. Let me see who influenced them. Let me see who they toured with. Let me see what's this genre? I've never even heard of this subject before.
Yeah.
Oh, this is wild. Let me check this out when I'm in the mood for it. And it's very much the same thing because within wrestling, you have these different international promotions with their own styles. You have more traditional British style wrestling. You have deathmatch style wrestling. There's where just wild weapons and blood and all this stuff that to some degree existed in wrestling years ago, but it's just gotten more extreme as time goes on, kind of like hardcore music, that kind of thing.
It's funny when you were talking about, your international promotion, the wrestling world, I can't remember what it was called, but
Stardom is good for his shorthand. That's what I
Stardom. The way you were talking about it, and then when you were talking about how PWI was when we were growing up, right, where it really leaned into it, it really reminded me of what WWF back then, now E, was like in that, late 80s into the mid 90s, where there was very you had good guys and bad guys and the very theatrical storytelling, which I think after the Attitude Era, they kind of went away from being quite so theatrical, and some of it was racist, right. There were some major problems with that, but it was, outside of the problematic nature of it, I feel like wrestling used to be a little more theatrical, that they still had that kind of, it seems a little more, I don't know, you're inside it. It's a little postmodern, I guess.
It is. The fourth wall was broken in a very real way, and WWE is in large part responsible for that because Vince McMahon, I believe in court, said something along the lines of, "Well, we shouldn't have to deal with these athletic commissions because we're not really sport. We're predetermined outcomes, and we're using elements of sport." So that's definitely part of it. I think all of it. Also, it's some of it is that society is changing because, certainly, there was always this buzz about, is this real? How much of it's real? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that's been going back, before some of our grandparents were born.
Yes, absolutely.
Exposés on it and things.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as widespread because you didn't have the internet and social media. So that was another aspect. So they sort of leaned into that after a while.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk about during the Bret Hart list. There's one rivalry there that was responsible in part for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. the simplest, the reality, Ricky, is that in Stardom, as in much of other wrestling promotions in Japan, they are not as consistently acknowledging how choreographed it is. They really do protect, and I've noticed this just on the magazine side of things, trying to get access to people, like really trying to impress upon them, like, no, we get that that the wrestlers have to keep kayfabe in these interviews. That's historically how we did it anyway. We're 100% down to help you do that on this side of the ocean. You know, like that's please. And it gets more eyes on the product. And I think there's such respect for the art form and the sports side of it going back so far in Japan. It was never, I don't want to say it was never. I'm sure there are people even now that laugh at it, but but it's really like a much higher level of respect culturally than it is in the US. Like there really is just a lot of side eye over here that there hasn't been necessarily for as long.
It's an alternative culture, even if it has been in popular culture. It's still an alternative culture.
100%. So I think it's respected, and it's a little bit easier to keep kayfabe. And I do think that's part of why you can tell these more straightforward stories, even if you're doing this wild action. Whereas on the West side of things, there's this compulsion to set everything up with a 15-minute promo talking about the match and like, here's why I really hate this guy. And it was a little simpler back then, and I think it's good that we've gotten away from the broad strokes and stereotypes and the problematic side of it.
Absolutely.
Representation in wrestling has improved quite a bit, so there's good things about it, but unquestionably. But I think we could benefit to some degree by getting back to the
little bit more.
Hey, here's these two people, and they don't like each other, or maybe they're they both really want the championship, and they're going to go head to head with it. If we can get back to that to some extent,
think about. I mean, there's a the thing I think about that is the Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Miss Elizabeth. Felt like real drama, and I think they did hate each other, so maybe there was real drama there,
right?
And there's a part of me where I think we can, to your point, blend that a little bit, right? Get some of the kayfabe back in there, because that's part of the fun of wrestling, and I do feel like that's been lost a little. Like, and that could just be me, but when I watch now, because we're in on it so much, it lost a little of that mystique. Was did Jerry Lawler really hate Andy Kaufman, or were they friends? Who knew,
right?
And I know that's going way back, but there was just something about that, right? That you could have these characters, and we laud method actors, right? We laud Daniel Day-Lewis because he'll stay in character, and we'll talk about Jared Leto, but we didn't acknowledge what an incredible job these people did of embodying a character all the time in public. Like, they had to be that persona. And I'm sorry, like, that kind of part probably did kind of suck, right? That you didn't get to just be yourself with your fans. But how cool is that, right? You got to see these people. You really hated Big Van Vader,
Sure. Well, he was legitimately a terrifying man. He was like, who would mess with that guy?
Well, and then he was on Boy Meets World and was very.
That's true.
But what is out there? Like, do you think so I say all that, but then there is real life drama, right? And we're privy to that. So like something, the CM Punk return, like, how does that, for you, who's deeply entrenched in it now, and was deeply entrenched in it then, how does that feel to those kind of like Miss Elizabeth wedding, those kind of moments?
So, I mean, that's a good example. And that's one where I was a little more forgiving of the long talking segments, which frankly, Ricky, after decades, like, I'm bored of the 15-minute promo. It is very rare that it works, unless it's like a retirement or something really special, or like when CM Punk came back when he first returned. But he had this feud with MJF, which is, I think, probably in part what you're alluding to here. But MJF, one of the top bad guys in AEW, legitimately grew up idolizing CM Punk. There's a famous picture of him with CM Punk when I don't know, MJF's probably in his teens. And they built this story around that, with him like going after CM Punk and saying, it's because, you were my hero and you helped me get through everything. And I said, you like to joke that this was just another day to you, but this was the best day of my life. And I had people picking on me at school because I was Jewish. And then I went home and I thought, at least I'm going to get to see CM Punk and meet him tonight. At least I have that. And then one day you were just up and gone from wrestling. You walked away and I didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking. And MJF is this like famously like underhanded, just vile person.
Yeah.
And you're like, that could have happened. That easily could have happened.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people were like, oh, the CM Punk's gone. What the hell?
Yeah.
And he was a little younger. And even CM Punk in the ring, like he without the microphone, he goes, is this real? Is this real? Like,
yeah.
And people didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
It was like, everybody's talking about this.
Yeah.
And then the next week, like he kind of called him out on it again, like saying, like, tell me the truth. And then like, he was like ready to tell him the truth, and they ended up just blindsiding him and beating him down and bloodying him. And he's like, he basically said, like, you're a fool. You shouldn't have trusted me. He flat out quoted an old CM Punk moment that he had used against another wrestler, Jimmy Rave, who unfortunately passed away last year. But he said, I'm a snake. That's your mistake. You shouldn't have trusted me because I'm a snake. And like, it was just really, really volatile, dramatic stuff. In the moment, you get sucked into it. When you step back and look at it at a distance, you can say, oh, this was an homage to this.
Yeah.
And this was really clever because Punk did this in the past and MJF did this in the past. And this could mean MJF kind of taking the mantle of CM Punk's former place as this top wrestling heel villain, you know? So it's just, even now talking to you, I'm getting kind of like goosebumpy. I've been watching all these years and it's like, that was so well executed. And and given that history of like problematic things in wrestling, they took really dicey subject matter and they weaved it in a way that felt appropriate because of who was saying it and how he was saying it and how that story it felt true. Even if like every note of it wasn't 100% true, you know that like he's been very open about the fact that he's been bullied in the past and bullied because of his religion. And you know that CM Punk left wrestling and you know that had to have hurt him because he
idolized the guy growing up. Yeah.
So it was amazing. That is worth, I realize I just gave away a lot of it, but if it's still worth going back and watching it and then seeing the ensuing matches between them.
Well, I think we're long enough away from that if somebody weren't I think we're outside the spoiler zone on that.
Oh, one. Sure. But I mean, like if somebody's interested in checking it out, not having watched wrestling, but I don't know.
Well, you know, I think you had to give that context because if they didn't have all that context, watching it wouldn't make any sense. And that's, you know, something when I saw that and saw how impassioned people were about that, I was just like, that really reminded me of watching, you know, Bret Hart's turn against the United States.
Yes.
And, you know, even then, you know, was this really real? But it definitely felt real when you think about the Attitude Era, right? Like, and what that represented and what Bret Hart represented. There had to be some legitimate, like, oh, I really do hate this. This isn't the wrestling I want anymore. Right. And so seeing that, because for those of you that don't know, Kevin does know this, Bret Hart is my favorite wrestler. Number one. That's, I guess, important. But it was just kind of wild because the politics of the real world creeping into that, I do think makes for some powerful stories. I just wish we could find a way to blend it, right? Make it make a new one. So it
doesn't always have to be that intense either. There are simpler stories you can tell that are every bit as effective.
What's your, you know, before we go into our top 10, so we're going to do our top 10 Bret Hart rivalries, which Kev got me with this, and I will say I took my time and actually thought through this. Normally I just do it off the top of my head, but I was like, this is something I want to be prepared on. So I'm prepared. But what's your favorite storyline in wrestling? Like, what was your favorite, just had the best matches, had the best storyline in wrestling history? Any promotion, anything?
Oh my God, that is so hard. Man, I'll give, this is an example I give for one of my favorite matches. So let me use it here too. And it goes back to that classic good guy, bad guy thing. So in NXT, which is the AAA baseball of WWE, it sort of evolved into like this WWE extreme for a while. Like it was like just like this third varietal of WWE programming apart from their Raw and SmackDown. But at the time, it was still on the up as this developmental league that was getting more attention increasingly than in some circles than the major league, just as, you know, some people like to go watch AAA baseball.
Yeah.
And these like hungry athletes there, they had this rivalry between Sasha Banks and Bayley, who were currently two of their top women's stars. And there were several good matches in this series. There were like some multi-woman matches, all centered around this NXT Women's Championship. And it was pretty well known that outside of the ring, these two got along really well. That wasn't a well-kept secret in this modern day and age of wrestling.
Right.
However, in the moment, both of them embody these characters, as you said, where Sasha Banks being the boss, this heel, obnoxious, wasn't going to let anybody take her spot. Like, what did you do to deserve this? And then Bayley was this friendly to a fault, like to go up and hug her opponents, like just like purely designed for little kids to love her type character. And she's since turned away from that. But in NXT, it worked very well, especially when they were running some of these smaller arenas in Florida. She was very, very popular, or over as the term is used. And Bayley finally got into this championship picture where she was able to face Sasha for the belt. And they had this match, and it was like the semi-main event at, I believe it was the biggest venue they'd run to date. It was the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. And I was able to actually go up and see it in person. Megan and I drove up, and it was so good. And the sound that crowd made when Bayley hit, she did like, there's this move called a Frankensteiner, which you know. It's a head scissors with your legs. You flip the person over off the top. Bayley did an inverted version of that, where it was a backflip onto Sasha.
Oh, wow.
Landed on the ground. And first of all, like, that's not a move you see, at least this was like 6-7 years ago. This was not a move you saw a lot, period.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't see it a lot in women's matches. Definitely not a lot in WWE women's matches. She hits this, grabs her, does her signature belly to belly suplex. And like, you knew she was getting this championship. The whole crowd counts with her, 3 count. She celebrates, tears in her eyes. Even Sasha goes up to her after the match and congratulates her. They hug. It was just this incredible moment. And it was classic good guy, bad guy storytelling. And it was just still down perfectly. You were happy to see Bayley finally get her chance after this character that in some ways kind of limited her to always be this underdog, finally winning. And then they had a rematch the following month that was a 30-minute Iron Man match. And that was whichever we may talk about Iron Man matches under Bret Hart too, but whoever gets the most pinfalls or submissions in the allotted period of time wins. And that main evented a pay-per-view for the first time in WWE history, a women's match. So that was just a really good, like, I always use that, and I know a lot of other people do, is like, if I wanted to show somebody something to get them into wrestling, it's like, oh yeah, show them the video packages that set up this feud, and then show them those 2 matches. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect storytelling.
Yeah, that's hearing you talk about, I remember that, like, that happening, but I was not invested in. I'm still like, I've I check in, right, because it's fun to see, but I remember that because it really felt like, wow, that was like a signature women's wrestling match moment. Like, hearing about it really helped contribute to the popularity now, because Sasha Banks is, a main level performer, right? Like, and they both are. Bayley's currently out hurt, so she's been out for the better part of a year. So, but yeah, Sasha Banks has crossed over now. She's has a part on The Mandalorian. She's like, she's going to be a breakout, like John Cena, The Rock type. Yeah, I really legitimately think that. And in fact, I mean, it's on my list to get a feature story with her in our magazine, in her busy schedule somewhere, because at a point we're not going to be able, like, it's very hard for us to get The Rock now, because The Rock is very busy, and why would he need to talk to us? Yeah, he doesn't need wrestling
no
anymore. Maybe when he does his retirement run, he'll come back.
His lap, yes, for a while.
Because he's going to come back to wrestling at some point, right? And that's one thing I do appreciate about him is he still makes his pop-ins every now and then. He doesn't need to do that. And I think that's cool that because it's a family thing for him, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So now we're going to move on. Thank you, Kev. That was a great conversation. You remind me why I've always loved wrestling, talking to you about it. I want you to know that. It just, hearing you talk about it is so cool. And, so we're going to talk about my favorite wrestler and his top 10 rivalries. So, we're going to start at 10 and work our way to number 1. I've got my list up here. So Kev, why don't you tell me a little bit about this? You chose this topic, so let's talk about it. Then you give me your number 10.
I mean, I assumed even knowing the primary focus of RocketCon and games that like I don't have 5% of the knowledge that you do about it, that we would probably be talking about something a little more mutual. And I figured, okay, that's either going to be music or wrestling, but like the only reason anybody wants to see me on YouTube, if at all these days, is wrestling related. So I figured pick something wrestling and pick something that we both know well. And, Bret Hart, I always have a hard time picking an all-time favorite, but I don't have any problem calling him the all-time greatest all-around performer.
Yeah.
I don't know who my personal favorite is, but like he had everything one needed. The technical skill in the ring kept his opponents safe while also making it look like a real fight. Great storylines, rivalries, left the business better than he found it. Just Bret's fantastic. So I figured we could talk about his top 10 opponents / rivalries.
Yeah. So what brought you to your number 10 pick?
So number 10 pick is less a rivalry and more for one single match, which I believe was on Monday Night Raw in about 1994. And it pretty much, along with one other match that this wrestler had, made his career. And that's the 1-2-3 Kid who later became X-Pac.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's cited as this match where he got the pinfall on the recently deceased Razor Ramon, the legendary Scott Hall. And that probably is his number 1 career moment. But number 2 in making him a star was this match he had with Bret Hart. And I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on this, but there was actually a match somewhat recently. It may have been a CM Punk match, but there was actually it was CM Punk. It was his first match back against Darby Allin, I think. And they recreated this one moment in the match, or spot as it's called, where Bret Hart was, had the better of the smaller, younger 1-2-3 Kid until 1-2-3 Kid threw him over with like a side headlock or something like that. And then Bret went like this. And it was just this momentary acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Oh, this kid's good. Like I need to actually like bring my A game against him or I'm going to lose. And it just said so much in that one moment. And they recreated it. And somebody did a cool side-by-side. I'll have to send it to you, but
that is cool.
That's my number 10, just mainly for that one match.
I'm going to kind of lump him in with a rivalry later on, which you probably already know what that is.
Oh yeah.
But for me, there was a year-long journey after Bret Hart got the title the first time. And he had some guy I don't think was a great wrestler, but Bret had great matches against him. And that year-long journey from losing at SummerSlam, I think, when he lost to Yokozuna, to reclaiming it, what he was going on, I think that was one of the biggest, that was his hero's journey for Bret, when he really, I think, broke out as the number 1 star. So, and he made Yokozuna matches interesting, which was hard to do. So I thought, I never thought he was, there was a lot of fumbling around and falling on people in his matches, but he had some great matches.
Because he was actually a really good athlete, but he had this padding in his sumo outfit that they gave him, and he was of Samoan descent. He was not Japanese.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
And so he really did have his work cut out for him playing this one character, and I mean, did what the best he could with it. But the matches weren't always easy to watch.
Yeah, but I think I put him in here because of what he represented for Bret's career, not so much the matches, but that rivalry really, I think, is what made him a star. Like that put him over the top, made him the face of the WWF at that point. So Yokozuna was my number 10. What's your number 9?
My number 9 is sort of adjacent to that, Lex Luger. The two of them were both going up the card, kind of in position to be main eventers.
Yeah.
And they tied at the Royal Rumble one year.
I remember that
moment where they tumbled out of the ring at the same time, and then they each got a title shot against Yokozuna, which was when Bret finally won the title, because the first time Bret went after it, he was kind of robbed of the championship, and then Hulk Hogan came in and scooped the title up, which I loved as a kid. As a Hulk Hogan fan, you were probably curious if you saw that. And then Bret and Lex had, I don't think they actually competed against each other much on TV beyond, beyond like, well, actually, wait, they each had a match against Yokozuna. That's how that went.
Yeah.
But they face each other at house shows. And I think this whole, okay, is it going to be this like big bodybuilder type who is the next face of the company, or is it going to be like the wrestler's wrestler and the exits of Execution Bret Hart?
Yeah.
And I think without having that alternative in Lex Luger, and then him being chosen as the one for various reasons, I think that's a turning point for Bret in his career as well.
Yeah, that's the career rivalry. Definitely. I didn't even think about that aspect, but that makes a lot of sense. And I do remember that because I found Lex Luger very boring, because he was very much a throwback to an era of wrestling where it wasn't as enjoyable, right? That we weren't quite technically proficient back when.
No, it was bodybuilders and shoving people.
Yeah. Well, mine was, they had some really great matches. Mine was about kind of going back to that CM Punk kind of thing you were talking about, grew up idolizing him. Mine was Chris Benoit, because they had some really great, I mean, Chris Benoit was an incredible wrestler, but he also grew up, came out of the same network as Bret Hart, grew up idolizing Bret Hart. And I don't know that was as much played into the actual, they didn't bring it in, but if you knew behind the scenes, right, that they were, this was, a family affair, right? And obviously a tragic story with Chris Benoit, but their matches and the history they had there, and just seeing anybody coming out of the dungeon that was technically proficient like that. I loved watching them go after. They had a couple of really great matches. I drawn a blank on one of them.
They had the tribute to Owen Hart after Owen.
That's right. Passed. That's right. Which of course, why would, like, they were, and I think Chris Benoit was probably one of the most technically proficient wrestlers ever, right? Like just the two of them together was really fun to watch. So for me, it was well, I won't use his nickname because that's kind of but Chris Benoit is number 9. So what was your number 8?
I should mention real quick too, Ricky. Like I struggled with whether to have Chris Benoit on this. So I ended up not putting him on there just because, as such a huge fan of his, I can't watch his matches anymore. But like his and Bret's chemistry was incredible. So it was more like a Chris Benoit, get out of here. Like I don't.
Yeah. Oh no, I understand.
But on the in-ring side, it was they had incredible chemistry, having been trained in the same place, and both being like top-notch technical wrestlers. So no doubt about that. Less of a technical wrestler, more of a all-time great heel. At number 8, I had Roddy Piper. Who Bret Hart won the Intercontinental title from. What was that? WrestleMania in '92?
I remember that match.
I should know that offhand, but I don't. With 100% certainty. But Bret had the championship, lost it. Whether or not this was what actually happened, the story was that he had the flu or something like that. And at a house show, he lost the championship to the Mountie. Then promptly lost it to Roddy Piper at Royal Rumble, I believe. And then at, I want to say WrestleMania 92. It was the two of them one-on-one for the championship. And, Roddy Piper was kind of, apart from being one of the all-time most successful heels and villains and just being very popular amongst wrestling fans, was not always the easiest to work with. He wasn't very giving in the ring in the way that maybe Bret Hart is. He infamously did not get pinned on television for something like 15 years or something like that. And then finally Bret pinned him. And it was such a huge deal. So I think in the story of Bret's career and the fact that he was the one that was finally able to beat Roddy Piper clean, that's a huge deal.
Yeah, no, I definitely I remember that match, and that was definitely a career making moment for him, right? That was a step out from being the Hart Foundation, to being his own man. But I don't and I think Roddy Piper was a great heel. I thought about it, but I feel like that was only their only real match was that match.
This is true.
So that's why I didn't go with it, but I did love, that was definitely because I loved Roddy Piper was such a great villain. I missed that brashness, that cockiness, and owning the villain role. So yeah, that was a great match and a great moment. Mine was one of those big guys, but was a athletic guy. He left to go be a part of the NWO. And he was a bodyguard for, I believe it was for Triple H at that point, right? When Kevin Nash, or was it Shawn Michaels? He was Shawn Michaels bodyguard. And that he was kind of the thing I really loved about that was, I'm sure this one's going to come up on later on both of our lists, but he was kind of like the main boss, or the guy main bodyguard you had to beat before you got to the final villain. And it was really fun because you could see Bret just exasperated with all the shenanigans. But Kevin Nash Diesel was a great wrestler. He did a lot of great sales, and watching them in the ring against each other. Bret struggled with a lot of the bigger guys because he had to do so much extra work for them. But they had good matches because Kevin Nash could actually hit his marks, make his moves. And I thought it was just really fun to watch them. And it was fun. That was a fun era of storytelling, even if I don't really like how it ended.
That's a good one. I actually don't have Diesel on my list, but there's not really a good reason why. That's classic Bret Hart rival.
Yeah, he had a lot. He had so many great moments in his career. So sure. So that was my number 8. So what's number 7? Go ahead.
Number 7, I have Jerry Lawler, who not on the level of Chris Benoit, maybe, but there are reasons why people aren't crazy about Jerry Lawler as a person. But we don't have to get into that. But as far as an in-ring rivalry between him and Bret, and how it was told out of the ring, with Jerry always taking shots at Bret's
his family.
Yeah. And then they had was it a Kiss My Foot match? Was that what their rivalry?
Yes, I remember that
culminated at one point. It was just very of that era storytelling. And Jerry Lawler, we spoke of these different territories in PWI, making them accessible because you could get them on TV if you lived within a certain radius, but I didn't get them in Philadelphia growing up. Jerry Lawler was, even though I was aware of him, him wrestling at that level with that gimmick, full on with the crown and everything.
Yeah.
And it was very fresh at that point. And I think he was, there was this, I think WWF also, to its credit, did a good job of showing that this guy's a really big deal from Memphis, and he if Bret beats him, takes him to a new level. So I think again, he's another important kind of stepping stone in Bret's career.
Yeah, I may agree with that later. I don't know. So for me, number 7, this was one he had a rivalry with through most of his early career, both when he was in the Hart Foundation, and then when he was a solo wrestler. He's married into his family. That's Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog. Their early matches were awesome. And I think that, you know, feuding with the British Bulldogs versus the Hart Foundation was awesome. And then when they got, you know, were solo wrestlers, I think that was some of his, outside of like Ricky Steamboat, I think those are some of his best solo matches, early career. Both great wrestlers, great personas. They had great promos against each other, you know, sometimes friends, sometimes enemies, and then, you know, brothers in real life, or outside of, you know, through marriage for a while. So yeah. I thought that was just a great matches, and just so many great promos. And for a long time at the beginning of his career, just a great rival. So Davey Boy Smith.
Awesome. I will have more to say about
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So what's your number 6?
Number 6, I have Yokozuna.
All right.
I think you've covered everything pretty well before, but I'll just add that was maybe more like the peak of my wrestling fandom. Was the first leading to that first WrestleMania match.
Yeah.
Was when I was watching the most and the most intently. And I kind of fell off gradually over the years. Oddly enough, and I don't know if we've talked about this, I missed a lot of the Attitude Era as it happened, because around that New Generation era when Bret was on top.
Yeah.
And not because of him. It was more just like I was started to get more interested in other sports and music. Things I started watching a little less. So, I mean, I kept an eye on it.
Yeah.
But so maybe that's part of why I have, like, for instance, Yoko here and I don't have Diesel on there. But that's how it landed. So I have him at number 6.
Yeah. I mean, obviously a landmark in his career. And it's funny, the Attitude Era is when I started pulling up, probably just a little bit after you. But just because my friends really started getting into it, so it kept me involved. And I don't have them on here because I do think they had kind of a rivalry, but I think the one wrestler from the Attitude Era that I didn't put on there was The Rock. And I know they had great matches, but I do think The Rock was one of the people in that scene that Bret did respect. Mm-hmm. Even if he wasn't, like, it felt like, because he was, you know, multi-generation wrestler, he still did things the right way, even though, you know, he didn't. I mean, obviously we'll talk about that later, but I do think he had some great matches with The Rock. The Rock didn't always have great matches. He could have some pretty boring.
Well, especially early on. I think The Rock, as his career, like towards the end of his active run, he was actually having really good. They weren't classic technical matches, but for the style he worked, perfect. But
the Hulk Hogan role, he was a proficient Hulk Hogan. So anyway, I will give you that was I think our first crossover was Yokozuna. I think there'll be some more later, but I think outside of you know, one of his biggest rivals, the most technically proficient wrestler for number 6 they ever went against was Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. And that was Perfect was a heel. It was like super heel. They fought, I think, for Intercontinental Championship. That was the level they were battling her out mostly. Perfect did win the title eventually, right? The heavyweight title once, I think.
Not in WWE. He won it in AWA.
Okay. Yeah, I knew he had one. So he never quite reached the level Bret did. You know, but as far as, I mean, Perfect Plex was a great move. And their matches were awesome. Like, heel versus face with great execution. The promos were fun, you know, but you could tell they were both that really worked to make the other person look good in matches. So when you had them going against each other, it was awesome to watch them go. So, and I just, you know, they had a fun, you know, 2 years where they were clashing against each other. And so mine was Mr. Perfect.
My number 5 is a guy named Mr. Perfect. So, yeah, I mean, what else can you say? I mean, they were both people from that territory system where it was very much like regional and local wrestling, as you said before. And then you have Kurt Hennig, actually, he didn't, I forget if he's actually from Minnesota. I should know that off the top of my head, but that is where he became a main eventer. He won the heavyweight title, the world heavyweight title for AWA, which was a big deal. It wasn't on the level of the WWF at that time, but it was aired nationally. I believe during his run, it was airing on ESPN, but it was certainly like a top level, like near the top level promotion. At least on the level of like what an ECW was in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, very different presentation. It was more technical, but like as far as notoriety, like the average person could feasibly have heard of it.
Sure.
And the biggest stars were known. So Vince McMahon and WWF scooped up a lot of these big stars from these territories, and Bret Hart became the hitman in WWF and, was the Hart Foundation. Yep. And then, reverse order, but both things. And then Kurt Hennig eventually became Mr. Perfect and developed this persona that everyone would really know him for. And they had these incredible matches, especially for the time in WWF, which was not known as like technical wrestling promotion, like the big comic book style. And it was very popular with kids and popular with some adults. And it didn't, but I think Bret and Kurt helped change that a little bit because these matches were getting such a good response, along with some other wrestlers doing their part as well. And I remember even as a kid, and I couldn't say this is a good technical wrestling match. I mean, if I did, I was parroting an adult.
Yeah, sure.
But like, you could tell watching it, like, oh, these are some cool looking things they're doing.
Yeah.
They're different. And like, I don't see this guy doing this, and I don't think this guy could do this. And I think even as a kid, like you can look at that and appreciate it for what it is. And then when you get older and you see like how they were, I don't know, like the one criticism, if it's made of today's more athletic and hard-hitting and acrobatic wrestling styles, that it looks a little bit less like a fight, but those guys still made it look like a fight. So good.
No, I mean, obviously I like Kurt Hennig was one of my favorite wrestlers too. I mean, I just loved watching. I wish he'd gotten I think if he'd been 3 or 4 years later when when their style of wrestling became more popular, I think he would have been a massive star because he could work a mic, he could hit his spots, and like to your point, I think he was also a little bit older, so he just kind of missed that window. He was still in that. That's too bad, and unfortunately, like a lot of these, another tragic story, right? So there's a lot of those on here, but my number 5 is also was on your list, and it was probably the greatest villain, pure villain in his history. Took it out on his family. I just remember the King of the Ring match when he got so mad at Bret being crowned the King of the Ring. And for me, in the kayfabe world, they had it felt so real. You felt like he really hated the Hart family, like through and through. And Jerry the King Lawler it was just such a great villain because he announced most of his matches. So he would be just down there heckling him when he was a manager, just anytime he could be a needle in Bret's side. He was, and Lawler was a good wrestler. He wasn't great, but he was technically proficient, especially from the era he came from. Right. Yes. So they could get some good matches in there. You'd see them go against each other, and it looked real. The choreography was good. Bret sold him a little bit, but I always, Jerry the King Lawler, I remember just how much him talking about his mom and dad and attacking them. I think it's Survivor Series over the barrier, and just what a great heel. And for him, that was probably the biggest heel to me in his career. So
I kind of want to go back and watch one of their matches too, because one thing that both of those guys are famous for too is throwing like a good realistic looking punch without actually clobbering someone. Someone like Vader maybe was actually clobbering people most of the time. So that's So I think we'll probably have a lot of crossover as we get up here. There's still some names missing.
So who's your number 4?
My number 4, and I'm a little surprised I don't have him higher, but I mean, there's only 4 spots left. Is Owen Hart.
Spoiler alert. That's my number 4 too.
Okay, so let's talk about Owen. I mean, Bret's little brother. Of course, met a tragic end at the Over the Edge pay-per-view. Really horrible situation. He a stunt gone wrong, a stunt that should have never happened. But he and Bret had some incredible moments in WWF, this brother versus brother feud. And they'd certainly been in the ring with each other. I don't know if they had official matches in Stampede or not, but they certainly were wrestling around the Hart family dungeon, training growing up. So they knew each other better than just about anybody. And they had this rivalry that spanned two particularly interesting matches. The one was a steel cage match, I believe it's SummerSlam 93. And that was incredible. And you'll see homages to moments in that match still today. People will recreate parts of it. I remember there's one Edge versus Christian match, and those two were kayfabe brothers, and they flat out stole the ending from it, and it was cool. But Bret and Owen had that match, and of course they had their famous, one of the most beloved WrestleMania matches of all time at WrestleMania 10, and that's where 10 or 9? Am I mixing up the years? 9. But it was the year that Bret won the championship, and in the opening bout of that show, he lost to Owen. Which was huge for Owen. Kind of a single star when he had been this lower card, tag team guy for a while, and then just kind of
remember that match
easily dismissible. Well. So good. So I don't know. What do you think about Owen? I've been going on for
the thing obviously I didn't appreciate as a kid. So as a kid, this wouldn't have been on my top 10. I'll tell you. I thought it was, Owen was Bret's bratty little brother. That was that was his persona, right? Very, obnoxious kid. But then when I got older and was watching those matches, I mean, they were really good together. And there probably was some sibling, some of that sibling rivalry had to be real, right? Your brother's the face of the company, becomes the face of the company, and you're, nothing. But then Bret, put him over, right? He didn't have to do that, and he could have been like, no, that's not how this company works. But Bret put his little brother over on the biggest stage of wrestling.
Wild.
In a great match. They were really good against each other. Just everything you said. And it's wild how well they sold that, Owen hates Bret. Because when you see just how much they cared about each other, and just obviously the feelings that family has against the WWE are mixed at best. Owen Hart, that was a great rivalry, and it's sad ending, obviously, but the rivalry was well done at that point because Bret was in a different company. So I think this one, my number 3 won't be on your list, but I'm thinking your number 3 might have been on my list.
So my number 3 is Davey Boy Smith. So one of my favorite matches of all time, SummerSlam 1992, at Wembley Stadium, Bret and British Bulldog. And that's considered one of the greatest Intercontinental title matches of all time. Great technical wrestling. Another situation where Davey Boy was at one level, and he was pretty well regarded. But again, went from the tag team ranks to this mid card, and then Bret really made him look like a star in that, this big main event. In front of a British crowd, and they had other great matches too. I want to say they had a really solid one at King of the Ring a couple of years later. I skipped class, a 3-hour night class, one of them where you skip, the teacher's actually going to notice, my senior year of college, when I had already skipped one of these classes. So this was at the point where I was risking having my grade level knocked down by missing it. Because Bret had his DVD set out at WWE, and he was making 2 appearances per his website. One was in Ontario, and then for some reason, the other one was in Northeast Philadelphia at the Best Buy on Roosevelt Boulevard.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So I skipped class. I went and met up with, my buddy Andy. I met up with
Yeah.
him, and neither of us drove. So like I had to go home and then meet up with him. And then we got on the bus and went up Roosevelt Boulevard. And then we went and waited in line to meet Bret Hart. And I was like, I got to have something memorable and good to say to him, because he's like, everyone's going to be fawning over him. And I said, him versus Davey Boy is one of my favorite matches of all time, and it's an honor to meet him. And then on the TV behind him was whatever that other match was with Davey Boy from a couple years later. And he's like, oh, thank you. This is a good one too. And that I'll never, like, it's just such a casual but like positive interaction with them. Like, I'll take that with me forever. They say don't meet your heroes, people you have respect for, but like if you can keep it brief enough, it can be good.
And it doesn't always turn out bad. And I think that was one of the things I liked is he was a guy you rarely heard poor fan interactions with. He took the fan service, like the fan side of it, very seriously, because I know it's silly, right? Like we're talking about professional wrestling, and I know it's silly, but one of the things that I do appreciate about that kayfabe era was, how much the fan interaction and how seriously they took it. And that's one of the things I always liked about Bret is he realized that he was working for us. He worked for, Vince McMahon and everything, but that family really, they took that seriously, that, hey, they were taking care. It's like John Cena with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, right? Like I love that. Like I hear about John Cena, like that's a guy who takes the fan part of it seriously. Because I think some of that gets, not all of it. I know there's a lot of them that do, but I think there was a long time where they realized these fans are our livelihood. And Bret was really great at that. So, and you hearing that story or just reinforce it, right? Like, hey, this guy.
Right. I mean, I'm in my 20s at this point. He didn't have to. He could have been grumpy or whatever.
Fine. Yeah. No,
I signing
like
autographs
that.
for 2 hours at that point. Or whatever.
Yeah. We've definitely met people in bands that are, and we're like much more accommodating circumstances and a lot worse attitudes. So, so my number 3, I'm pretty sure is not going to be on your list. And because you admittedly weren't as invested at this point, but I think it's the only person at that time who hated Vince McMahon and almost as much as Bret, and still does, even though he works with the company, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I think they behind the scenes probably got along real well, even though they're very different people. But they had some great matches. I don't know if you've gone back and watched any of their matches, but I remember just a really a bloody faced incident with the sharpshooter and Stone Cold tapping out, and just like he tamed the rattlesnake. And I know there was, behind the scenes, Bret had a lot of issues with the Clique and the Attitude Era, but he did a lot of work with Stone Cold in that time. And they were, Stone Cold is the face of Attitude Era and Bret as the, stodgy conservative of wrestling. But in his, I Love America, right? That was the Bret Hart Canadian era, which that storyline was absurd. But I think the reality of it was Bret being frustrated with the direction that he was channeling his frustrations with the direction wrestling was going in.
Right.
Against the guy who I think probably kind of agreed with him, even though it made him a bigger star, because he was he came up the same, he was stunning Steve Austin. He did the work. And then he caught on a character that just kicked off this thing. But you could tell he was Stone Cold. Steve Austin was an old pro. He came from a younger guy than Bret, obviously, but came from that same mentality. Probably grew up watching Bret Hart. And they put on some just great matches against each other. Like, I'm not as good at recalling the matches as you are. I'm sorry.
No, well, I mean, obviously I mix up the WrestleMania numbers and all that. And it's my full-time job.
So I don't know if you've watched those, but I would encourage you to go back and watch them, because they were great matches between two really talented wrestlers. And the ideological future of the company was kind of, I think that rivalry made Stone Cold a star too. I think that's one of the things that really shot him up, the Texas Rattlesnake versus the Canadian, because Bret was still, a top 3 draw in the company at that time. So, My number 3 is Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Now I'm kind of curious, Ricky, what your top 2 looks like, because my number 2 is Stone Cold Steve Austin.
All right.
I think I have an idea of
the
person we don't have the overlap with, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But no, I've absolutely seen. I've seen a couple of matches between them. There was one where Stone Cold was coming up still, I think, as the ringmaster, or maybe he wasn't technically the ringmaster anymore, but he was still using the $1 Million Dream, Ted DiBiase.
Yeah.
And Bret counters it into a pin, like in a really innovative kind of.
Yeah.
And you'll still see this spot used to end matches a lot now, like a variation on it. And that's a very good, just technical wrestling match, because Stone Cold had this base. And I actually my introduction to him was WCW's Stunning Steve Austin. When I heard he was becoming this huge star, as with a shaved head, and like, oh, where's his long blonde hair, and why is he like such a hard ass now, and like, but even when I wasn't watching, like, I still had friends pointing things out to me, and occasionally would catch a big show or like a match that, like, you have to look at this one. And I don't remember if I saw it during that period or if it was when I started to get back into it, like I was catching up on all the stuff I missed. But yeah, I've absolutely, that WrestleMania match with the I Quit match with him and Stone Cold and Bret, and Ken Shamrock was the ref. And Stone Cold would not quit, but he passed out in a pool of his own blood in the show. Brutal. So good. One of the best rated WrestleMania matches, and best rated. It's like most. So yeah, incredible. So I think, like you said, it's this passing of the torch moment. There were these two guys who had very different philosophies in the moment, despite coming from some of the same roots. And Stone Cold started wrestling in the late 80s. So I would be shocked if he wasn't at least partially influenced by what the Hart Foundation and the British Bulldogs were doing in the WWF. He went and trained. Not trained, but he worked a lot with Chris Adams in Texas. And I believe Chris Adams, who was a British wrestler, was in Stampede for a time as well. So there's definitely some overlap between them. Great rivals. And I will sometimes think about the fact that, like, in those two very different eras, I'm glad that they got to overlap in the way that they did and make some magic before they went on their respective ways, so. Yeah. There we are. So who's your number 2?
I think your number 2, or my number 2 is your number 1. I'm gonna guess because my number 1 will be outside of the ring.
Okay, then I know your number 1.
My number 2 it was definitely his number 1 rival in the ring. I don't think anybody would question that. And they had some of the most iconic matches. The first ever ladder match. People, not the first televised, but the first ever ladder match was between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, because they were the only two people that were proficient enough to pull it off to make sure without getting hurt. Shawn Michaels, I loved. He came up the exact same time as Bret Hart, right? Actually, even a little bit before him. He got a pop before him with, one of the most iconic moments in wrestling, right? Kicking his partner through the barbershop window.
Right.
Like that was a big deal. And, for a long time, Shawn Michaels was a heel and Bret Hart was a face. They came up together, against each other, so many matches. And then obviously the Montreal Screwjob was probably the most famous match in wrestling history still to this day. If not, it's one of the most famous because of the far reaching consequences. And I'm sure you're going to talk about this, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but great matches. Shawn Michaels is a very different person. And I think, obviously one of the people most responsible for the direction of the modern professional wrestling, right? Mm-hmm. He was the corporate guy that sucked up to Vince and got his buddies in place and took over the company. And Bret was like, that's not how we do things, right? Behind the scenes, Shawn Michaels won out, but their rivalry was real. I think they've mended fences at this point, but there's definitely real life animosity for a long time between those two, and it spilled over into some great matches. So what's your number 1?
So my number one is Shawn Michaels. And I believe, I don't know if on top of all that you mentioned the Iron Man match that they had. So that was the 60-minute, and it ended with a sudden death, additional fall. That was the first time WWF had done an Iron Man match. As you mentioned, the first time WWF had done a ladder match. And then the infamous Montreal Screwjob, which was actually not the first time WWF had done a Screwjob. It happened at least once before with Fabulous Moolah and Wendy Richter back in the 80s, because they wanted to get the belt off Wendy Richter. They had Moolah show up and dressed up as in this gimmick as the Spider Lady, who was the woman's name is escaping me, who normally played that gimmick, but it was obviously a different person, and she just kind of like rolled her up and pinned her, and it was like, okay, I have the belt again now. Fabulous Moolah was not a good person either, but it's a whole other day. Yeah, Shawn and Bret, this huge kind of battle of the ethos in some ways, of the traditional and the irreverent, and they made magic in the ring nonetheless. And like you said, their rivalry in a very real way ended up breaking the fourth wall and exposing the wrestling business in a way that like the toothpaste could never go back in the tube.
Yeah.
And gave birth to the Attitude Era, which I've got to assume that the person behind the screw job is your number one.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's Vince McMahon.
They did eventually have a match, Ricky. They did.
But I don't think the Click. For those of you out there that aren't familiar with the Click, that was Hunter Hearst Helmsley and was Paul Levesque, right? That's his real name. And Shawn Michaels basically took creative direction of who was going to win matches, who was going to, like, they started running the story behind the scenes. It popped off. I lost my screen. Give me 1 second. Sorry. I think I'm still there for you, but you're not there for me.
Okay.
I'll have to edit that out. So yeah, Vince McMahon, what's the classic line? Bret, we didn't screw Bret, Bret screwed Bret. And Bret Hart charging into the locker room to find him and punching him so hard he knocked him in the air and broke his ankle, right, or sprained his ankle,
something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's not a kayfabe hit. That was a very real punch. And yeah, it did. That was the moment that signified Attitude was the king, right? Bret was gone from WWE. Shawn Michaels was fully in charge, his number one professional and in-ring rival, because they were definitely vying for the top spot in the company for a long time, right? It was those two versus each other, and I do think it was kind of poetic that the person that he put over in that era, Stone Cold, kind of took up his mantle after he left, right? He became the anti-Vince, and it was him carrying on Bret, I felt like, because Vince McMahon is the ultimate enemy of the Hart family in a lot of ways. And that was that moment kind of broke me from wrestling, because it felt like something that, while they were all in on it, there was still good deals behind there. And then there was bad blood there, well-earned bad blood by Vince McMahon. So he's my number one villain for me. In a lot of ways, he's a terrible person who dominated an art form I loved, because I would call it art. It's athletic art. And he definitely, Bret's career never recovered from that, right? He went over to WCW and never really had a moment there. And he just kind of existed. That was so he kind of ruined Bret's career. I mean, he still made a lot of money and had a good career over there, but it was never the same. He was never the top draw.
No, and he eventually got hurt, kicked in the head by Goldberg, and that ultimately resulted in brain issues for him, and he had a stroke eventually, and he couldn't wrestle anymore.
Motorcycle accident too, right? Didn't he have a motorcycle accident?
He may have. Some of the history is a little fuzzy, but yeah, he never properly wrestled again. He did come back, and when he mended his fences with WWE, he had a WrestleMania match with Vince McMahon that was like largely smoke and mirrors. It was like a lot of props and things like that. And he actually had an Intercontinental title run at that time, I believe. He beat The Miz for it, I want to say.
Oh, wow.
And it was, it was a really weird time. And like, I assume it was pretty much like he punched The Miz and then put him in the sharpshooter.
Yeah.
You know, but
yeah,
I need to go back and look at that. I may have some of those details weird.
That is weird. I was decidedly checked out of wrestling at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get it because, like, actually, famously with sports and really even with wrestling, because part of that was like I was a big Hulk Hogan guy, and I mean, talk about people who turned out not being what you thought they were. But
yeah,
he left WWF and did not immediately go to WCW. There was a gap.
Yeah,
and I think I have this habit, or had this habit at least, when my favorites would check out, and I mean, it wasn't just him. There were a couple others that left. I would sort of drift away from it, and it happened with sports too. When a favorite player of mine would get traded to another team, I'd hang on for a little bit, and then like, I don't really have a new favorite yet, and then I would just something else would grab my attention, you know. So, you know, but it happens, and thankfully now, I mean, there's so many things out there to enjoy that if you do get bored with something. And I mean, this isn't by no means just limited to wrestling.
Yeah.
Find something else that's more up your alley, you know?
Yeah, no. Well, hey, Kev, it's been awesome talking with you.
Likewise.
You know, you reignited that part of me. Every time I talk to you about it, I get excited about wrestling again. So maybe I'll go check out Star World, right? That's what you called it.
Stardom.
Stardom.
The full name is World Wonder Ring Stardom, but that's just the format. Everyone calls it Stardom.
That sounds like it might be right up my alley. So thank you. And I look forward to the day we see each other again, and tell Megan I said hello. I hope she's doing all right. And it was good to talk to you. So
talking to you too.
Thanks,
my best to Adrian and the dogs.
Will do. Will do. All right. I'll talk to you later, man.
All right.